Good afternoon, everyone. This is Allison Weir from the National Diaper Bank Network. I want to welcome you to our panel discussion on grants, finding them and writing them, how to find grants and how to write them up and benefit your diaper bank. I'm very excited to welcome the panel. We have our own Troy Moore, the Director of Development here at the National Diaper Bank Network, who's going to start us off, and Sarah Couch and Tamara Bailey from the WestSide Baby, who will talk about their experience in finding grants and writing up grants for their program. Jorge Medina of the Texas Diaper Bank, who will talk a bit more about what he's done with grants. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So what I'm going to do is, during the presentation, I'm going to put everyone on mute if you haven't put yourselves on mute already. And then if you have a question in the midst of the presentation, go ahead and type it in the dialog box at the bottom of your screen. And once we've gone through the three presentations, then I'll open up the microphones for questions, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Troy Moore, our Director of Development here at NDBN.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're going to go through a deck here, kind of real quick. This is a culmination of several different decks on grants that have been presented in the past, and some of it's a little bit of a refresher. Some of it may be new to some folks that are new to the organization. But I invite my fellow presenters to jump in at any point in time with any comments that you guys have on the deck as we go through it. And again, as Allison said, for those listening in, if you have any questions, please type them in, and we will try to circle back and address those. So we're going to try to buzz through this deck fairly quickly on this, and just allow time for discussion as we move forward. The first thing we just want to kind of refresh everybody's mind is what is a grant? And really what we're talking about is, this is the money that a particular organization gives out for a specific purpose. There's generally requirements made by the grantor, that's the person or the individual, the organization or foundation giving the money, and then the grantee, that's all of us that that are asking for the funds. And one thing I always keep in mind is, most of us I think understand this, is that grant makers don't have to give out the money. Just because you're doing something wonderful and nice in the community doesn't mean that they're going to fund you. And generally we're going to think about the grant makers and that we're trying to help them accomplish their goals. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through, but generally they all have a structure of ideas that they're trying to push in the community or on a national level. So different types of grants that we're looking at, that we're kind of talking about are kind of private foundations and government agencies. And on the private foundation front, that's the one I think most of us are the most familiar with, and that's through their local community foundations or family foundations, private foundations, corporate foundations, or in many of the organizations out there, the United Way as a funding source. Government agencies, that's also another funding source, and that's generally answering a request for a proposal, whether it's a local, state, or federal level. And often, another thing to always remember is that some grantors are going to ask for a letter of intent before you can actually submit a grant or grant proposal. So we got to really be careful and do your due diligence and research, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through, but we always want to make sure that we're answering the questions that are there, not presenting more information that's being asked for, and not doing something that is kind of out of bounds. So always remember to look for whether or not there's a letter of intent that has to come first, and you have to be invited to submit a proposal or not. So on the types of grants, one thing I wanted to address, just some new statistics that came out on community foundations and specifically the donor-advised funds. And what we're seeing is an uptick in this particular type of grant and funding opportunities where you've got an individual or a family, let's say, that is directing the money. They're helping make the decision on what they're going to fund, and it might be a pet project, a pet cause that they want, and so. But there's been a significant uptick in donor-advised funds. About 63% of donor advised funds are going to local organizations, so that's a really great source at the local level for you to look at. We've seen like a 10% increase each year in the past 10 years in this area, whereas general grants for have kind of remained flat in that category. So the donor-advised funds are generally come out of community foundations, and so that's kind of where you want to kind of look at on that front as we go through here. Now, the trouble with grants, okay, the trouble with grants is, many of us find them very difficult to find the right grants. They're a lot of work sometimes, so the applications can be very, very cumbersome and time-consuming, and also it can be, not enough money for the time that's been invested. And then we also kind of are afraid of failure, afraid of being told no, and that's something that I think we all have to get over and move forward. On whether it's too much work, finding the right grant, is in fact a lot of work. But we, need to be. We've got to, do the work and not create the deck or the proposal from scratch each time. You've got to remember that a lot of the material that we're developing can be used over and over again, slightly tweaked, but we're developing basic content. Many of the grant proposals that we write ask for the same kind of information. And also, keep in mind that the work that we're doing kind of helps inform our other fundraising and our awareness raising activities. So you generally are developing text and copy that can be used for multiple purposes. So we've got to think about that. The investment of time that you're doing for grant writing has multiple uses, so it's not just a one-off kind of proposition. The other thing to ask yourself, in the organization, this really depends upon the size of the organization. I know, within the network, we have, large organizations that have professional staff, and we've got some that are, just you guys all alone. And so, whether to hire an outside grant writer is not applicable for some folks, but for many organizations it is. And you have to ask yourself, do we want that kind of help? Is the grant large enough, and is it going to, the potential return going to justify the cost? So again, looking at, too little money for the investment of time. Again, it can be. If we're click one more. If you're going after say a $1,500 grant and the application's a 20-page application, you may say, hey, this isn't right for us. So it's really looking for resources that fit what you need and moving forward on that. Again, circling back, you want to develop this core language for grants because, again, remember there's similar information requested from grant to grant. There is a trend within the grant writing community or the funding community of what's called a common application, where they're basically asking for the same information, and they're using this one application form so nonprofits don't have to reinvent the wheel each and every time. Find somebody in the organization that's good at writing or good at researching, and put them on this. That's another kind of tip on this area. And then when you get into your budget aspect, don't just make up numbers, and really invest the time that you need to get estimates on how much things are actually going to cost. On the point of too much risk of failure. People remember Ted Williams, or talk about Ted Williams, who was a famous baseball player. He was famous for not ever swinging at the first pitch. He was basically looking at what the pitcher was throwing, and even if that first pitch was a strike, he let it come in so he could get an idea of what was coming down the pike. So that's kind of what we want to apply to in the grant making philosophy here as well, that sometimes it's going to take more than one time going to an organization, a foundation, to reap the benefits that we're looking for. So we really want to make sure we're investing the time that's going to deliver the success that we have. We also want to make sure that the grants we're looking at are a good match with our organization, and that we are a good match with the grantors. And really want to make sure that we have good evidence to show the impact and effectiveness of our programs. And another point that we'll talk about, and I know some other folks will talk about, is how to build relationships with the foundation staff or organization staff. How do you make those contacts and move it forward? But again, overall, remember that you're looking at pitches. So we want to be able to circle back, with an organization. One time does not mean, hey, I should never go back to them again, to this particular organization again. But it's always important to remember that, if you can do the major gift, you can go out and ask for money. You can do the grant writing. You can do the searches and the grant writing. So where do you start? Where do you start as far as resources on this? There are a couple different organizations, but one starting place is with the Foundation Center itself. And the Foundation Center offers a lot of webinars online that you can do at your own convenience that really talk about how to utilize their services and also providing some other services along the way. You can actually the Foundation Center has a free online directory that you can use. It is somewhat limited on its capabilities of where you can search. You can do kind of some basic state and zip code kind of searches. You can search by size of grant, and you can look at 990s from a foundation. But it is a little bit limited. If you're looking at doing a search from your own office and you don't have access to the more paid site or the paid site on this. Now, the paid site, generally should be accessible through a local library. So if you can invest the time of going to a local library, you can get a more comprehensive access to what the Foundation Center has to offer. And I threw in another one here. The New Mexico Grant Makers Directory actually has a good way of looking at what's available in your local community. Again, you can do it by zip code or by state to see what funders might be in your particular community that you can reach out to. Also, part of the Foundation Center, or under the Foundation Center, is an element called Grant Space. Part of their website is called Grant Space. There's some great webinars on Grant Space that really take you through what you can do within their organization or within their part of the website. Again, it's the Foundation Finder, as I mentioned, and you can look at 990s, you can look at trends. There's a lot of research online that can be obtained, facts and figures from what other organizations are doing. They also have on there, completed grant applications, successful grant applications that you can take a look at. But again, Grant Space is divided up. They've got subjects, they've got the skills development, they've got a whole classroom, and much of which is free. Some of the items, does require a fee to have access to, but many of what they offer, of the resources they offer, are free. So I'd encourage you to look at that as well. When you're doing research, when we start digging around and looking at a particular organization, you want to look at what's the interest of that particular foundation. And again, sometimes this is not just research on Foundation Center and some of the other, grant-making sites, but looking for the particular foundation, its own website, and going in and reading their materials. Now, not all foundations and funds have websites, but many of them do. Many of them make it very open, to people to come in and say, this is what we're funding, and this is what we don't fund. And sometimes you got to really, all the time, you got to make sure that you're looking at what they will not fund. And some people make it very clear that, of what activities or organizations that they won't fund. So we really want to learn about, a grantor and foundation's ability to give, and make sure it makes sense with what you're doing. And so you got to really look at how your work fits in with the mission of that particular organization, that particular grantor. So we kind of talked about this, on annual reports, looking at their annual reports on the that are available on the Foundation Center website as well. Some organizations only fund in specific geographic areas. Some will fund only religious organizations. Others won't fund any type of religious activity or organization. And others, they might fund youth organizations, but they don't fund, the 0 to 3 category. So it's really looking at what these organizations are funding and make sure it's a fit from the start. we always want to remember, you know, again, when we talk about the learningness or the ability to give, to learn about the ability to give, so you want to stay within the comfort zone of that particular foundation. You know, they're probably not going to stretch, you know, if you don't fit, you're not going to talk them into stretching out and doing something that they're not comfortable with. So we've got to really make sure we're in that arena. Go forward one more. We also want to look at, you know, again, developing a relationship, and I think some of the other presenters may talk about this a little more in greater detail, how to go about doing that. But, you know, it's not all about the application. The application is extremely important, but, you know, it's who do you know at this particular foundation? Do you have, you know, do you know any of the staff, any of the board members, or do your board members know anybody there? So it's really, you know, figuring out how to make those connections, what are the opportunities to talk about what you're doing, and getting that presented, you know, to the funding organization before your proposals come in and as we go along here. Another aspect is if you've submitted a proposal, I think, you know, you can sometimes come back and ask for, you know, a review of like, okay, what didn't we meet? So you want to kind of get debriefed if you're rejected. You know, like, are there, you know, some organizations will do this. They'll provide you some feedback and say, you know, these are areas we don't fund, or this, you know, this, we didn't have enough information that, you know, to push this thing forward. When we look at, you want to explain your work in a way that fits the prospect's interests. You know, again, we kind of, you know, touch base on this, and it's making sure that you're a good fit. And one of the focal points here is use the grantor's language. If there's, you know, in the application process, if they're using specific language, you want to, you know, kind of regurgitate that back. I mean, not like a parrot, but you want to be talking the same language and using the talking points and buzzwords that they have. You want to make sure that you're answering all the questions in a proposal. Don't leave things blank. You know, it's not a time to make up things as well, or you know, show your creativity in your writing. You want to get to the point and make things concise as you're writing the grant proposal. Look for support from other people in the community that you know, basically references. You know, with the connections your organization has with the community, and you know, and really kind of try to impress, you know, the prospects that you have out there. You want to use, you know, relevant data, you know, as we're going forward too. And again, you know, that's sometimes easier said than done. But you know, there's been other webinars I think that we've presented before on how to use the census data, current census data. You look for resources in your community, other organizations that are doing similar type of work that you are, particularly, you know, poverty-related data you can pull, and that's going to, you know, strengthen your proposals. You know, every grant you should be asked, you know, answering, you know, what's the problem and how will your actions help, and why is your organization the best organization to move things forward. And you want to also make sure that you're giving yourself time. You know, look, if there's a specific deadline for a proposal, you know, some organizations only review grants. You know, they accept grants up until a certain date, and then there's a review period, and sometimes it's only once a year that they'll accept applications. You know, don't try to jam yourself up where you're trying to do a proposal, you know, a major proposal in a few days, because you'll make mistakes and it'll become very obvious that you're just cutting and pasting it and not really tailoring your copy to what the requester is asking. So really give yourself time to read over the grant, to prepare as you move forward with it. You want to be looking at your outcomes. You know, again, what can you measure? And you know, for example, you know, if you said you distributed, you know, 10,000 diapers to 400 low-income families, you know, that's a good point. But if you distribute 10,000 diapers to 400 low-income families, you know, that were attending parenting classes, you know, then you're adding content. You're making your case stronger. So they really want to look at your outcomes. What is the impact of the work that you're doing, and try to present that as clearly and effectively as possible. Again, some of the pitfalls to avoid when you're looking at grants is, you and again, kind of touch on this, not following the directions, not completing all the sections, not recognizing word limits. If something says, okay, you've got 25, characters here to talk about your organization, don't list 50. And again, working on deadlines. It's extremely, extremely important. You want to understand the operating and capital expenses as well. Some foundations and organizations will fund these, others don't. So you really need to pay attention to what people say they will and will not fund. And don't try to disguise your operating expenses as a program. Again, we talked about this a little bit. Using national data that can be effective at times, but really, if it's a local organization, local community foundation, they're going to be most interested in what you're doing. What are your stats in your local market? So really look for that kind of information and provide that back as part of your proposals. Don't assume that everybody knows what you're doing, or even if the organization's familiar with what you're doing, because you may have someone reviewing the proposal that's never heard of your organization. So make sure you explain everything very clearly and articulately as possible. And then if you have the luxury of time and you have someone that you trust, ask someone outside your organization to read the proposal and say, in the application, say, is there anything in here that's confusing, that's not clear, that we need to rework? If you didn't know anything about us, did we make the case that we should be funded? And so that's always a good point to go down. And finally, here's again just some additional resources, some online resources that you can go to for information and for other webinars.
Okay. Thanks so much, Troy. Sarah and Tamara, could you tell us what you guys have done at WestSide Baby?
Sure. First, I'd just like to explain our model. I know you touched on grant writers, and we do have a grant writer. Tamara's our grant writer. I'm the Director of Development. So I just want to talk about our relationship really fast and how that works. So as the development person, I work on the strategy. I give Tamara updates of what the program's accomplished, which are provided from our Director of Programs. I go through the materials that she's getting ready to submit, do some submissions, and then focus more on the relationships with the foundations and helping search through engaging our board and people. And that leaves Tamara with all of the hard work, if you will.
Oh, no, I look at it the other way, actually.
She's the one who's always writing our submission. She's doing all the updates of what we've accomplished in the past year, any new program goals, any new mission-driven facts or figures, anything like that. She's the one who does the majority of our searching for grant opportunities and the majority of submissions online. And then she also maintains the calendar, which has all the prospective people that we're going to ask for money, the ones that we need to renew, and keeps that calendar in order. But then we also have support from some of the other members of our staff. Our financial director or manager is really active in getting us budgets that are split down to each of our programs, which makes submitting easier for specific types of grants. And then our program director provides us with all the goals for the year and what was accomplished in the previous year. So our entire staff is kind of involved in making our case strong, and then Tamara handles all the submission and putting it together. And then I just want to talk about briefly kind of how we prepare to submit grants, and then I'll let Tamara go into how she finds them, and then we'll talk about how we kind of match our case to different foundations and just some tips of what we found to work well. So in the beginning of the year, before the beginning of the year, like in November, December, we've already gone through the budget process for the upcoming year. And with our big organizational budget, we break that into program budgets. So one for the diaper bank, one for our community collections, and one for our car seat program. And having this done before the beginning of the year makes it extremely easy to start submitting as early as possible. And then we also do our strategic planning before the beginning of the year, so we have all of our program goals outlined, which I then forward to Tamara, and she updates all of our templates with what our specific goals are for how many car seats we want to distribute or how many diapers we want to collect or distribute. Just getting her that as soon as possible really helps her prepare so that we can launch into the new year as productively as possible. And then we use a submission calendar to track all the dates that things need to be turned in, when we need to send reports for grants that we already have. And we also track it in our database. So if anybody has any questions about that, you can contact me offline. So I will go ahead and let Tamara talk about how she goes about finding our grants.
Well, first I want to say that one of the reasons that the relationship with WestSide Baby works so well is because, as Sarah explained, we have a very defined role in what we do for it, and it makes the work really efficient for me. And so I think that whether you're using an outside grant writer or you have somebody in your organization who's doing it, having those well-defined roles really cuts down on kind of that excess time that some organizations find themselves in trying to apply for grants. I do the basic research for our grants just the same ways that we just talked about. I go in and I use Foundation Center online. I put in the keywords and I find everybody that I think might be a possibility for WestSide Baby, and then I go through and I look individually at each organization, at each foundation, to make sure that they are a good match, that we're in alignment, that their goals are in alignment with our goals, and how we might build a case for that. The most important, and then I put together a list that we break down and we assign different programs, decide if we can ask for operating for them or if we want to ask for program support for various programs, and try to get it spread out across all of the programs in general, operating and capital when there are opportunities for capital, to ask for capital investments. But the most important piece of that is that that is only one place that our grants come from, that our research comes from. We also, some of our best opportunities are from board members letting us know about a place they're connected or something they heard about, from the executive director knowing someone that has a connection. And so I think it just goes to show that you can do all this research, but you still need to be pulling in those opportunities as they come up and using your whole network to put that together.
One of the things we'll do with the board, if Tamara's finding a new organization and she thinks it's a good match, she'll pull a list of the trustees on that foundation, and then we'll circulate that among our board members to see if anybody knows anybody on the board, and just help build that relationship to get a little bit of an insider perspective, I guess, for submitting.
Yeah, okay. Where are we on this?
Yeah, no, just keep going.
From that, and that's really what we do. We go down, we use the available time we have, prioritize for obviously more money and less work, and what we spend our time on. But in general, you can, after you've written a few grants, you have a lot of information, and sometimes you may be looking at a big proposal, maybe a large online form, and I think it just remind yourself that you probably have already answered a lot of those questions before. Look at it, gather it up, and you could save a lot of time in writing things that way.
So one of the things that Tamara and I wanted to talk about was how we go about matching our case to different foundations. So many of you probably have a similar setup to us. We have multiple programs. So we have our Diaper Bank program, we have our Community Collections program, which is all of our clothing and shoes, and then we have a car seat program. So when Tamara does the initial search on new foundations that we can approach for grant support, one of the things she'll do is use the keywords to match different programs with their funding priorities. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and it's pretty general, but to make sure we're covering everybody that is, children, women, basic needs, economic disadvantage, because those are the keywords that the Foundation Center uses, the FDO uses. And but then more specifically, when you're going through and looking at those places to find ones, we look a lot for basic needs, because anyone who's funding taking care of the basics for people is usually you can make a case for diapers. And that's one of the things, although you are looking for alignment, you're also looking for those opportunities where an organization, particularly a local one with whom you have a relationship, might not have seen diapers as providing this baseline economic support for low-income families. And so while you're looking for that alignment, you also want to be checking in with those people to see if maybe they haven't thought about it before, but this is somebody who's covering food, for instance, and giving a lot of support to food banks. You want to check it with them and say this is another opportunity that would help support low-income families in our area too.
So when we think about our diaper bank program, we'll think about what the ripple effect it is when a child has an adequate supply of diapers, what that means. They're less likely to be abused. Their hygiene is going to be better. The household stress is going to be lower. So we might even use some of those key thoughts to search for matches, like foundations that are interested in preventing child abuse. Sometimes we can find the case to say, hey, diapers are an essential part of that.
And what sort of success have you had with the child abuse argument?
What's that?
What sort of success have you had with that argument in getting grants?
I mean, I think it's worked well with part of for the more general places where in the local folks that are wanting to support the community. We haven't gotten funding from a specific RFP saying we want to prevent child abuse. Usually,
okay.
But it allows us to talk in the terms that they want to hear.
Okay.
We can't prove necessarily that it's doing this, or we don't make the case entirely around it, but it allows us to open the door and tell them why it's important to be part of this bigger picture.
So another example of that is a lot of organizations are interested in strengthening families, and they use those words, and those are ones that we go for too, and explain how supporting WestSide Baby strengthens families.
Or organizations that are focused on specifically women and girls. We can pull some data that says, this is how many single mothers we support, or we can generalize how many women and how many girls we support and connect our case in that way so that it's appropriate for us to be asking for funds.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so we just have a couple of tips to go over that help us with our grant finding. So we are always aware of services to find grants that might cost as much, as you can often get. So Tamara, this is one of her tips.
Okay. And we already touched on it actually, but I find there's a lot of services that you can get subscriptions to look for grants, and I don't think most of them are worth it. You can just go to the library, use the resources that are available there, or use some of the online things. But you do want to refine your search as much as possible so that you're not spending too much time going through ones that aren't appropriate. Cross-check for alignment, again, to make sure your work is more efficient.
And then we just make sure that we're always on top of our calendar for deadlines of submission, and also just as important is reporting back on grants that we have received. Often it serves as a reapplication for the next grant with them, or it just lets them know that we haven't forgotten them, we value their support, and it shows them what we've been able to do with their support and actually do what we said we were going to do. And then kind of on the relationship side, one of the things that I do is just try to make sure that we're constantly in contact with our foundations, whether that's including them in our newsletters, including them in our invites to special events, making sure they get the annual report in the new year, and just making sure that we're kind of always on the forefront of their mind, calling them if we haven't heard back on how our application is doing. And often they'll invite us to events, so we want to make sure that we're going to their dinners or their award breakfasts or whatever it happens to be, and just be present. And then if we don't necessarily know a foundation, Tamara will be like, Sarah, you need to call them. And I'm like, okay, I guess so, it's my job. So just introducing ourselves and making the personal contact, because we can write applications and submit them and all that kind of stuff, but it really does help when you take a moment to pick up the phone or shoot out an email to introduce a person at the organization.
And actually, there was one more thing I thought of that another good resource to be aware of is many communities have a professional grant writing association. You don't have to be an independent grant writer to belong to those. You could have a membership for someone in your organization, and that can be a great place to meet others, to have a chance to talk to a bunch of funders at once. I noticed that the Seattle folks are having an upcoming funders forum where pretty much everybody we're going to be applying to grants for is there, and that is a great opportunity to meet people and to find out about how well you might align with them. So I would encourage you to look for those in your area.
Great, thanks so much. Those are really helpful tips. Jorge, what have you learned about the grant writing process?
Well, last year we were very fortunate, or 2 years ago we were very fortunate to have been nominated and received the Bank of America Neighborhood Builders Award. And the process for that is that local community members selected by Bank of America actually nominate organizations, and then they select the organization they're going to give this award to. And it's a pretty good award because it's $200,000, $100,000 over the course of 2 years, unrestricted, plus they give you an additional training for leadership and for your up-and-coming leader within your organization, which is worth about another $15,000. So that award is really, really great, but it also just doesn't come by haphazardly. It is something that comes with building your organization's credibility in your community and your reputation. So that is what I really like to share with some of the diaper banks, is building your organization's credibility to attract more donors and grants. And when I talk about credibility, that is your trustworthiness and your expertise in the area of the service that you provide. And so there are many facets to an organization's operations that contribute to the credibility of your organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of them, and I may not go into too much depth because I could actually give a whole workshop on this. But first of all, what I think about is the organizational financial strength. Some of the things that you can consider is, first of all, do I have an accounting system in place, especially for the smaller ones? Do we have an internal or an external bookkeeper? Do we have software to do our bookkeeping? And that adds to the credibility of your financial strength in being able to maintain good books. But also added to that, do you have an external audit? And this may be a little bit cost prohibitive for some of the smaller nonprofits or diaper banks, but I think that it's a worthy investment if you're able to do that. And sometimes you might be able to find a CPA that might want to do some pro bono work. So the sooner you start having an audit done, it really is going to be really good for you when you're applying for grants, because even though sometimes some funders make an exception where they just ask for your financial records, if you're able to provide an audit, it just makes you, presents you as more credible. And so I think it's a worthy investment. Some of the other things that you need to consider are like, do I have different types of revenue streams, or is our organization dependent on one major funder that if that funder were to pull out or not fund you in 1 year might jeopardize your operations? Funders do look at these things. It's also included in your audit report, so that might be something where you're going to have to look at your strategic plan on how you're going to diversify your funding over the course of several years. Also, this is something that we've talked about at the conference, but do you have local support, which is the first thing you need to have before you're going for a national funder. You need to make sure that you can demonstrate sufficient local support, which is donations, in-kind donations, other grants, local foundations. But more importantly, you have to start with your board. Is your board giving? Do you have 100% of your board contributing annually to your organization? Some foundations will ask you that. Do you have 100% participation? So that's also something that is very important to demonstrate when you're applying for grants. Another thing that has helped us build our credibility is that we became a United Way agency. It is something for our organizations to consider. I know that it's a very stringent application and review process, and it's a commitment that you make, but you have to weigh what that will do for your organization in the long run. Because the United Way organization goes through their annual campaign period in which they ask organizations to go make presentations at different companies and organizations. That will open doors for you to build and establish relationships with corporations or businesses in your local community that you wouldn't have. So for us, that's what it really meant. And also, the credibility that comes through the United Way stewardship. Members that are community members that sit in their review committees are also potential donors or people that work for corporations. And so they know what you go through as an agency to maintain that United Way status, partner status. So it adds a lot of credibility to your organization. And so we have gotten grants from corporate funders but based on that we are a United Way agency. So that has helped us also. In regards to your program operations, there were some things that were also mentioned, such as having great and measurable outcomes. And also I would add to that if you have a written program evaluation process, whether it's something that you're doing internally where your own staff people are collecting information and have an evaluation process for your program, or whether you're hiring an external evaluator for your program. It's really great when you're able to demonstrate that to a potential funder. Other things to consider is that add to your credibility is what kind of systems do you have in place? Do you have a client data management system? Do you have an inventory management system? Do you have a volunteer management system? These are things that add to the credibility of your organization because it can be perceived that you have the systems in place, and it will provide you with incredible information and data, which then you can in turn use to report back to your funders. And so I think that it's important to start considering, if you don't have these systems in place, to start either working on grants to get these systems in place for your organization, or to somehow make an investment if your organization can afford to do so. Other things to consider is how professional are my marketing materials. Sometimes grantors or funders will allow you to provide them with additional attachments. So if you have a professionally developed brochure or an annual report, which some organizations don't have, it's something that adds to the credibility and the professionalism of your organization. So it's something I believe that you should consider investing in. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's easy to get maybe some pro bono work. It might be easy to get some pro bono work done for you from someone who knows how to develop these type of printed materials. Other things to consider is if you have any videos or news reports or news articles, and having a great website where you can have these available. A lot of funders do go through the process of going to your website and seeing how professional and how polished your website is. If you're using one that is more of the template style, you might consider at some point upgrading to something that is more professional, more designed, and will provide evaluate your website, use your board, use other volunteers to evaluate your website and to find out what other content they would like to see on there, and to make sure that your website is providing good content, especially so when your funders go to visit your website, they get a great impression and are able to get additional information that sometimes you're not able to include in your grants. So I think that that's also very important. Finally, other things to consider that add to your credibility and build your reputation in the community are any types of special awards that your organization has received, partner letters of, letters of support from partner agencies. If you have any partner agencies, have them write you a letter of support. Some funders do allow you to attach that to the application, which is really, really great. And if you're serving clients directly, I would also try to secure some letters from some of the clients. Those are really great also. And that's it.
Great, thanks so much. Those are all really helpful tips, Jorge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the mics to questions. But I want to get started with one question we got from WestSide Baby Corner. The question is, for all the panelists, what sort of an achievable, appropriate percentage of the level of grants for your overall budgets? Like, what part of your budget, what percentage of your budget should you plan on having funded by grants? Or is there a rule of thumb you guys apply to that?
At WestSide Baby, we get about 15% of our overall budget from foundations, and that's not necessarily exclusive to grants we've applied for, but sometimes our donors have family foundations that will send us.
Great.
For us, it's a lot larger percentage. We have, I would say, between about 75% of our funding comes from grants.
Okay. So, and do you find that level sustainable, or is it just is that sort of something that you wind up, do you get a lot of repeat grants, or is each grant a year-to-year thing?
Well, when I say the grants, it's several different. We have several corporate grants, and then we have private foundation grants, and then of course we also include governmental funding. We do have a local grant from the city of San Antonio. And a lot of these, especially like with the city and some of our corporate donors, these are grants that are renewable year after year. So we were able to establish a relationship, and then we just maintain that relationship, and it continues to grow. These are funders that may have given us, for example, I'll share with you all, there was one funder that it took 4 years before they funded us. And in the first year, they gave us $1,000. This year, their grant was $20,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's about relationship building and building your credibility with that funder.
Great.
I think that's a really good point, Jorge, that you got to remember we're in it for the long haul. Sometimes, yeah, you're going to get that immediate hit, but oftentimes it takes, an extended amount of time to develop the relationship and build the relationship, and as you pointed out, to build the credibility of your organization.
I think that's true with all donors, not just foundation support, but as an organization, that should be something we're aiming for with everybody we talk to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great advice. One question I wonder, let's say I'm a new diaper bank and I haven't received any grants to this point. What sort of grants should I be looking for?
I would say you want to start, this is Cameron, start with the small local ones, places that it's easy to call up and get a lot of help. These are usually around $5,000. Sometimes even less, although it's not really usually worth investing a lot of time in ones that are less than that. But to make your local case and to start with those.
I mean, we apply for grants that are $500, and every grant adds to your credibility as an organization, and it adds to your local support and how diversified is your local support. So, I mean, I encourage especially those small ones to look at everything from, you know, a $500 grant to, you know, a $5,000, $10,000 grant, you know, or more.
Terrific. Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question. This is Pam Sutherland from Happy Bottoms. WestSide Baby, it sounds like you have it sounds like, Tamara, you're a full-time grant writer. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm a contract grant writer.
Okay. Now I'm trying to gauge how much time, and I don't know if Jorge and if you guys are comfortable answering.
In terms of the amount of time I work for WestSide Baby, it's a very, very small amount of my total time. So it's less than 20 hours a month.
That's what I'm trying to gauge, is how much time is spent writing grants, but to go with that is, and again, if you're comfortable saying this or not, what's the dollar amount last year that you received in grants? Trying to gauge the time and the dollar amount that went with it.
It was around $70,000. But
I'm sorry, how much?
Oh, and one of the ways that we increase efficiency is we do create a template every year that gets refined as the year goes on, so that we have things ready to send out quickly with a minimal amount of my time, which is more efficient for WestSide Baby.
Did you say?
And you said that was $77,000.
Yeah, about $70,000 in grant requested funding. Yes.
And how many hours would you say per month or per week you spend writing and working on those grants, the grant reports, the whole grant process, the research and everything?
No, that's refined.
Well, now it's definitely less than 20 hours a month. But one of the things is Sarah does the grant reports.
Okay.
So Sarah does a little more of the grant work, so that I'm focusing on generating the new applications.
And then, Jorge, how about you guys?
Grants, it's up roughly about $450,000 that we raise through grants. And I have a full-time grant writer, and I have a full-time program coordinator that does all the reports for us also.
Okay. And I have one more question. Do either of you use donor software to track your grants, or are you just doing your own spreadsheet grant tracking?
We use eTapestry. We've defined some fields within eTapestry to help us track and report on what's due, what needs to be reported on, what's pending, what's been awarded. So if you have questions about that, I'd be more than happy to walk you through it if you use eTapestry or similar type software.
Okay. Thank you. And then, Jorge, what about you guys?
We actually just use an Excel spreadsheet. We've been using an Excel spreadsheet. We just invested on a system that, on a new client data management system, and it comes with the grant management system and volunteer management system. It's a whole package, and it wasn't that expensive. So we're going to start using that as we have a goal of trying to acquire even more grants. So we need something in place.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Just one comment, and I'd ask the fellow panelists to jump in on this as well. I think, one thing to keep in mind is as you begin, if you're just looking for grants for kind of the first time and trying to familiarize yourself with the various resources out there, it is an investment of time. You're going to spend a lot of time on the front end here of just like anything else that you're learning that's new. And it will get quicker and faster as time goes on. You'll become more comfortable. You'll understand, how to refine your searches, where to invest your time, and so on. But it does speed up as you develop the language and familiarity with the process overall.
I mean, it is a commitment when you receive a grant, because you're cultivating a relationship and you hope that this relationship will be over the long term. And so your responsibility does not end from the moment you receive your check. It is making sure that you're doing the reporting. Some grants have quarterly reporting. Some of them have interim project reporting, and then, of course, a final report. And that you're doing all the things that are important so that you can continue to grow that relationship with that funder. So it's going to be work. It's not even after the grant, you receive the grant.
Great. Well, talking about sort of the question professionalizing and volunteers, what do you say to an all-volunteer program who would like to professionalize with a paid executive director and a staff? Are there grants available for that, and what sort of search terms should we use?
Well, is the organization getting ready to transition to hire a paid executive director? And if that is the question for the all-volunteer board, do you have a strategic plan in place? And in that plan, are you saying that your next step is to hire a full-time paid executive director? And therefore, you can ask for seed funding. That can be something that can pay for part of it or can pay for all of the executive directors' first year salary. It depends on what resources are available within your community and within your state also, because sometimes there are foundations that may not be in your city but are within your state, and yet that community foundation funds throughout the state. I'll give you an example. We have the Meadows Foundation here in Texas. They're out of Dallas, but they give out grants throughout the whole state. And they will fund 2-year grants. For example, if you were asking to hire an executive director, they may fund you for the course of the next 2 years for that.
Okay, great. Thanks. I see that Claudette Langley has a question. Claudette, what's your question?
It was for Jorge. I didn't hear what the name of the Bank of America grant was that he got.
It's the Neighborhood Builders Award. And every local market, if you have a Bank of America, there is usually, you usually have a local market representative there. So what I would do, these grants are great. Find out who is a local market representative for the Bank of America Builders Award, and I would schedule an appointment with them, because this is what they do, and try to meet with them and talk about what you're doing.
Okay.
Start there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to a new organization that says that the grant application asks about the sustainability of their operation, and they've only just started? What's the best response?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
For a new organization looking at a grant application that asks about the sustainability of the operation, and they've really only just started, what's the best way to respond to that question, how sustainable the operation is?
Well, okay. Well, sustainability is not just about financial sustainability. That's only one piece of the puzzle, so to speak. So you can demonstrate, for example, sustainability through in-kind donations and volunteers and that have contributed to the sustainability of the organization thus far, and then you're trying to grow the financial sustainability of the organization, you can piece it together in that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would add, like you said, Jorge, the community partners that you have, the agencies you're working with, it's the network that you've established that adds to your sustainability. Is how entrenched are you in the community itself?
Great.
But also, I would add that if you're a small diaper bank or someone that's just starting up, then if you have some kind of strategic plan or a interchangeably a sustainability plan, is what is our intentions for growth. You can use that as your explanation for your sustainability. So, right now, grants only represent 10% of our financial sustainability, but our plan is to increase that by 5% over the course of 2 years, or we plan to increase that 5% next year and 10% in the 3rd year. Donations, or we plan to implement a major fundraiser by next year that we anticipate will raise a minimum of $50,000. So those are things that you can demonstrate that you are working towards the financial sustainability of the organization.
Terrific. Any other questions?
Can I ask one more question? This is Pam again.
You can ask as many as you want, Pam.
Okay.
Otherwise, I keep asking questions.
Well, what I like is that there's so many people here, so there might be some different answers and some common ground on this. From an accounting standpoint, and this is just semantics, is what we're trying to figure out. So you guys were talking about, foundations, money coming from a foundation. We've got our grant writing where we solicit. We've had a few foundations that have given us nice sized donations unsolicited, where we didn't submit that. From an accounting standpoint, do you segregate those to have a different account? Foundation income, it's all foundation. It doesn't matter whether you applied for it or not. Do you set out grants separately in your financials? How do you account for that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, accounting-wise, we'll put it into 3 major buckets: corporate, foundation, and then individuals. We don't get any government support, so that might influence it in a different way. So on the back-end accounting system, they're pretty big buckets, but on the development fundraising strategy is where I start dividing them into specific strategies of how much we're going to submit, how much we're hoping to get, how much we expect to just come in without submitting. So that's more of a strategy type thing.
And that's what, that's what we've got, our grant database, which is Excel right now. We're looking at donor software, but, we've got the total amount of what we will submit in writing. But then again, when we account for it, we've got the 3 big buckets you talked about: individual, foundations, and corporate. So, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That's how we do it. And we get audited. We've been audited for the last 2 or 3 years, and our auditors are all about supporting the system that we have. So
great. We're in the middle of an audit ourselves, our first, and we've had 2 reviews, and this is our first year of an audit.
Yeah. So
congratulations.
We're on the right track.
Yeah. I got to write the check for that. You can congratulate me later.
How about another accounting question? What about overhead? Should you include overhead in your grant request? And can you find, and what sort of things fall into overhead? Would a new warehouse be overhead, or would that be capacity building?
I think it depends on what you're submitting. We have an organizational budget that includes all of our expenses, but then we break out our budgets based on program. And typically when we apply to a specific foundation that is requesting support for a specific program, they don't necessarily look at the bigger organizational one as much as they do as the program, I would say. So we keep our overhead out of that, the big overhead, but we do include staff time and rent and that kind of stuff that's specific to that program.
And can I jump in with something on this? And I probably will anyway, but what we have found is when we meet with the foundations, the donors, that we ask them specifically that question, Allison, where we say, will you, for instance, the Hall Family Foundation, which is Hallmark, they funded a commercial piece of wrapping equipment and strapper and all this, and we said, what about the overhead, the electricity that goes with it, and increased salaries, things like that, and they said, add 10 to 15%, we'll fund it. And we did. And then another funder said, nah, we don't really like to go that way. So we just ask, and if they let us, we write for it.
Yeah, and the GuideStar recommendations now say that you should include overhead, that most grantors are expecting you to have something. But again, as Pam pointed out, it is very much the grantor's prerogative. But I think most responsible grant-making foundations are sort of recognizing that you need to pay people and you need to pay the rent in order to be able to actually accomplish programs. All right, any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all for joining us and thank the panelists for their words of wisdom. I hope that you found this useful. We'll post it up on the website, and we'll also send out the presentation charts to everyone who's on the call, and we'll put those on the website as well. So thank you all for joining, and have a really lovely Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.